Good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome. I believe we are live. It's just after 10 a.m. and time for another webinar where we will be discussing all things maintenance. And quite simply, we're going to be asking the question, are you putting your critical IBM systems at risk? So today we're going to talk about the 6 key risks that we, Evolution Systems, believe you, the customer, and indeed other business partners should be aware of when selecting hardware and software maintenance for business critical applications running on IBM. I'm Daniel Fleetwood, the Business Development Manager at Evolution Systems. And of course, I'm joined by Jeff Borland, the Managing Director of Evolution Systems. Good morning, Jeff.
Morning. How are you doing?
Very well. Okay, so we also have a special guest. I'm delighted to introduce Wallace Carr, a business leader within the IBM Technology Support Services Department. Good morning, Wallace. Are you there?
Good morning, Daniel. Good morning, Jeff.
Morning, Wallace.
Good. Thanks for having me on today.
Thanks for joining.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for taking the time. Now, Wallace, just before we start, how long have you been at IBM and specifically in the Technology Support Services Department?
Yeah, look, I've been in IBM for about 17 years now, specifically in Technology Support Services, or TSS, for roughly about 7 of those years.
Very good. So part of the furniture, really, and you would have seen it all when it comes to customers needing the right support at the right time, and of course, indeed, when they haven't had the chance to get the support or been able to get the support.
Yeah, indeed. Look, like I said, I've been in IBM for a little while, and I've had various roles within that time. So I started off in IBM working as a service support person in our managed services clients, and working with a lot of customers, and their support requirements, and helping them through some of that. And been with TSS for about 7 of those years, and I've seen quite a few different scenarios in that time.
Awesome.
Very well qualified to talk about maintenance.
Indeed. Great to have you with us. So before we start, a little bit of housekeeping. This is a live session and is being recorded. So if you are watching live, thank you for taking the time out. And if you do have any questions, pop them in the chat box and we'll have time to answer them later on. If you have missed the live showing, don't worry. We'll be making this available via our website and social platforms so you can watch back at any time. Okay, so Jeff, look, we both have been working with IBM products for quite some time now. You may be a little bit more than me, and in that time, we've sold a lot of IBM hardware and software maintenance, and certainly in more recent times, we've come across customers exploring the third-party option as opposed to going with IBM. So, in your opinion, what do you put this down to? As like I mentioned, we do seem to be coming across this more often.
Yeah, I think from what I'm seeing, when you're given organizations a choice between vendor supplied maintenance, third party maintenance, quite often the decision is made purely based on cost. And when we as humans make those decisions purely based on cost, it means we just don't understand the value. So quite often, you're just not seeing it. So our job as the business partner is to make sure that we're providing the value to the organizations that they can make an informed decision. And that's the reason why we wanted to put this event together today, and bringing on our IBM expert Wallace to help us get that message across, and so that organizations can make that informed decision.
Absolutely, and that's really the job of the business partner, is to make sure they have everything at hand so they can be aware of what's going on. And Wallace, do you see any other reason apart from price as a driver for customers perhaps choosing third-party maintenance instead of IBM?
No, look, Daniel, I think Jeff has pretty much hit the hammer on the head. Look, I think when a lot of customers think about support and maintenance, they're thinking really simply break-fix support. So, one of my hard disks have failed, an engineer needs to come and swap it out for me, and that's done. And I'm not sure, maybe that's that misconception has come out from, maybe consumer products or whatever. But, I think clients really do need to be informed to make an informed decision, an educated decision around, what does maintenance actually cover? And in particular, what does maintenance from IBM entail?
Absolutely. So that brings us to our first point, the first risk that we really want to highlight, and that is missing out on system firmware updates. So if third-party maintenance is selected, the customer has no access to system firmware updates. And I've had many conversations with customers who were maybe not made aware of this at the time. And this specific firmware update that we're talking about here requires access to the update access key. Wallace, can you tell us about the impact this has for the customer not having access to this, the UAC?
Yeah, sure. So it's the user access key, actually, or otherwise known as the UAK. And this is mainly applicable for the later power machines. So we're talking about Power 8s, Power 9s, and the more recently released Power 10s. So within those machines, there's an embedded UAK, or user access key, in the systems, and basically there's a time limit on that key. So that key automatically refreshes itself. Now, most of the times you won't even know it's happening, right? So if the machine's under warranty or under a valid IBM maintenance agreement, what happens is it uses its call home feature to automatically dial home, and then it automatically refreshes every so often. Now, once that UAK expires, what that means is if you're trying to load any firmware, you basically won't be able to. So the way it works is once the UAK expires, you won't be able to load any new firmware that has a build date after the expiration of the UAK. Now, you can still load firmware that was built prior to the expiry. So if you've got a UAK expires today, you'd still be able to load firmware that you downloaded last week or a month ago or 6 months ago. But if anything gets released after today, you wouldn't be able to load that. And I've had plenty of customers who've sort of been caught up in that situation, right? And they haven't thought of that situation. They've gone and planned their outages. They've got everything approved, and when they went to try to actually apply the firmware, they weren't able to do that. So it's something that really needs to be considered and kept in mind. When you're looking to making sure that you want to have updated firmware.
Yeah, I think that's important. I mean, as organizations, are becoming more security focused, having up-to-date firmware is critical. And so not being able to upload firmware really does put a significant risk to the business.
Absolutely.
Exactly. It comes down to having that policy management that is consistent and knowing that you have the ability to get those most recent firmware patches, right? So moving on to key risk 2 that we've highlighted is lack of IBM code fixes. So this one is fairly common, as customers I talk to and are often not informed about the official stance from IBM, is that third-party maintenance does not entitle you to have or to continue your access to Fix Central, where we can go and download fixes for devices, adapt to microcode, software patches, and in the IBM I world, that's PTFs.
Yeah, no, that's correct. So Fix Central, like you said, Daniel, is the place to download all that information on all those patches. Now that does get restricted only to people and machines who have a valid IBM maintenance agreement, or all the machines are currently under support. So there is a check that's actually done, and there's 2 aspects to this point, Daniel. First of all, if you're trying to obtain firmware, you won't be able to, because Fix Central does that check and it prevents downloads if you don't have a valid maintenance contract. Those firmware that firmware and microcode is IBM IP, and so that's protected for IBM customers only. The second point of that as well is if you had a problem that required a microcode to be a new microcode to be written for your specific issue, you also wouldn't have access to that. So in general, if you had a problem that required a microcode update to rectify that, you would not have access to that. Now, some of the TPMs might say to the customer, look, we've got microcode support, we can give you microcode support, and look, unless those machines are backed out with IBM, with an IBM maintenance agreement, that's simply not a true fact. Or at least they're not doing it in a way that conforms to the IBM licenses.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, integrity is really huge, and if you're getting install or PTFs when you're not actually allowed to have them, then there's a legislation thing there, right? So that's a big one for me. And just so everyone's aware, when Wallace is talking about TPM, you're referring to third-party maintenance providers, right?
Yeah, that's right. So anyone, basically, any other maintenance provider who's not IBM, so I would refer to them as TPMs.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and as we know, Wallace, it may seem like a hard disk failure, but it actually might be a bit deeper than that. And sometimes you need to get access to those fixes from Fix Central to stop that drive from failing. It might not actually be a physical failure within the drive.
Correct. Yeah, that's right.
Very good, very good. Cool. On to key point or key risk 3 is no active electronic service agent. So, or the call home functionality, which won't be enabled if third-party maintenance is activated. This is really important because the call home function not only alerts IBM to a problem, but it also can upload diagnostic data in advance to give IBM the ability to troubleshoot the issue quickly and in a more timely manner.
Yeah, you're spot on. And look, when you're investing in an IBM system, it's not just the hardware platform that you're investing in. It's the end-to-end. It's all the tools that come with it. It's the processes, right? And this is a really important point, especially for a lot of the high-end systems, power, the enterprise storage systems. That they, there are core home features built into a lot of these systems, and what that basically means is it's sort of a self-monitoring tool. And if something goes wrong, it has the ability to dial home back to IBM. And it does this regularly, actually, right? It does this regularly just to make sure that things are running fairly smoothly. But when it does pick up that something has gone wrong, be it minor or major, that does get reported back to IBM. So the call home is initiated, logs, diagnostic information is sent back to IBM. Now, in the normal course of a machine being under support, someone actually picks all that up. They analyze the logs, see if there's something major going on there, and if there is, tickets logged, and the remediation process gets kicked off, and we try to rectify that fault. So it could be that something goes wrong at 4 a.m. The machine dials home. So someone from support picks it up and starts working on the problem. And it could be that, but by the morning, that problem's been rectified. You come in the morning, you see the alert, and it's actually already been fixed. Or you call IBM and try to log a call, and someone's on the other line saying, well, yeah, actually, we knew about it a couple of hours ago. We're already working on it. Or maybe an engineer's already been dispatched and they're on their way to you. Now, if the machine is not under an IBM maintenance contract, what happens is that call home it still happens. The information is still alerted to our support teams. But there's a check that happens, and when that check finds that the machine's not under any sort of support agreement, warranty, or maintenance, that information is just dropped. So nothing happens with that call. If it's an alert that could lead to a potential outage or something more serious, then no one in IBM gets alerted about that, and so it'll be the customer's responsibility to pick that up. So like I mentioned, when you're investing in an IBM product, you're really investing in the whole suite of tools, the processes that come with it, etc. So this is a really, really important point, I think. It comes with this stuff comes with preventative maintenance, right? And this is so critical. We always think about maintenance as break fix. I've identified a problem. I need someone to come and fix it. We're talking here about, hey, look, there's something that could become a problem. It might be minor now, but like I said, it could lead to something a lot more major. We really need to start looking at it now and try to resolve that now.
Yeah, the key word there is preventative, right? And we've had scenarios where customers have had an IBM engineer just turn up on site, and they're like, "What's going on?" They were completely unaware that there was a problem actually logged, and that just reduces maximizes the uptime of the environment.
Absolutely.
The process works.
And look, I've heard stories about TPMs saying that they can make use of this core home as well, and that's simply not accurate, because I've heard stories where the TPM can intercept the messages that are coming from the machines to IBM, and the content of that message, a lot of the times it's not something that can be easily translated or understood to the normal technician, right? These include fault codes that, again, are IBM IP. There are manuals that, internal codes and translations that tell us, this code means this problem. So it's not something that can simply be, transmitted, intercepted, and, we can read what all the problems are. That's simply not the case.
Yeah, I remember back in the day as an operator, I'd remember some of those fault codes, but I guess they change over time, right?
I hope they have, Jeff.
I remember working for a bank in London, and there'd just be a guy just turn up with a whole bunch of hard disks. I'll be like, "What's up?" And he'd want to go and check the SAN and just put them in. I'm like, "Okay then." Like, he knew about it before we did. It was incredible. And also just going back to what you were saying there, Wallace, there's a whole host of other tools as well that IBM provides you with that can further help diagnose problems, which you don't have access to with third party. Okay, so this additional information really helps to bring the SLA or the resolution time down. And without those, SLAs could be breached, and customers could see downtime extended without the help of or the assistance of these tools, right?
Yeah, 100%. We make and we design, we support these machines. Our support teams have a plethora of tools at their disposal, and that really starts from the time you log a call with IBM. The remote tech support team are the first ones to pick up the phone. They're the ones who try to they triage the call, so they go through a problem determination process to work out what exactly is the problem. And for a lot of the times, they're actually able to resolve the problem then and there. I think the statistics are something like 60% of calls are actually resolved at that period of time. A lot of times we don't even need an engineer out there. And it's those tools that can help us quickly triage the call, work out what the root cause is, and how we remediate that call.
Yeah, it's a really great functionality. Okay, moving on to key risk 4 that we've highlighted, and this is the inability for customers to escalate an issue within IBM. So as we know, sometimes a failed disk or an expired battery case, can be a straightforward replacement. However, what if that problem does go deeper? Maybe the third party provider doesn't have the tools or can't go deeper to really troubleshoot why that drive keeps failing or why this keeps happening. So with no entitlement from a third party contract, the customer cannot seek further advice or assistance from within IBM.
Yeah, and this is such a key point, Daniel, and it's a pretty broad topic, right? And like I said earlier, at the beginning, a lot of people, when they think about maintenance, it's, hey, I've got a hardware fault. I need someone to come out and swap that hardware, that piece of hardware out. And look, that might be true for a lot of the cases. But when you've got a more serious issue, it's a lot more involved in that. So there's a couple of points to this particular issue. First of all, and we've talked about this earlier around the firmware. Sometimes if you encounter a fault, it's not always just a hardware fault, and the root cause sometimes does go deeper into the microcode and the firmware relating to that machine. So in those cases, if it's found that it's a firmware issue, there's two things. Number one, sometimes you might just be on a backdated firmware. So you do need to update that firmware. Now, if you're not on a valid IBM maintenance agreement or warranty, then you won't have access to update that firmware. Again, the TPM does not have, legally they don't hold the license to be able to apply that updated firmware. Secondly, even if you're in the latest firmware, there may be cases where specific to your environment, there needs to be new firmware to be written, right? And being IBM, again, we design, we manufacture these things. We can escalate the cause up to our product engineers, and that's their job, right? They, if we need to write new firmware for the customer's environment, they have the ability to do that. Secondly, when you're dealing with a TPM, typically what that means is, they might have a team of engineers. They know the product, very well, no doubt about that. But in IBM, that's and for the TPM, that's basically where it ends. They've got that deep expertise, and an engineer goes out, they try to resolve the problem, and if they can't, they're sort of stuck. In IBM, for us, that's basically where it starts, right? We've got our engineers. We've got a country specialist, so they're called Top Guns, which our engineers rely very regularly, work with very regularly with our Top Guns, and those Top Guns again have access to the specialist in global. So in the US, again, we've got teams who the product engineering teams, lab teams, whose job again is to they do deep dives into the products, down to the microcodes and firmware levels, and even root cause analysis as well. We've had customers where they've seen peculiarly high failure rates for particular parts across their fleet of machines. And so, in those instances, we can take those failed parts, send them up to the US and do specific root cause analysis to see, why are these things failing so often? And in that particular case, we found that, yes, indeed, that there was an OEM issue with regards to that manufacturing. And so the customer was able to make an informed decision to replace all those parts across all those machines, and IBM was able to help them with that, right? And it sort of goes back to the point we're talking about around preventative maintenance. If you can identify that issue early, you could potentially look at your rest of your fleet of machines and try to make sure that gets resolved as well.
Exactly.
And that works really well, Wallace. I mean, we've made use of that feature ourselves. We're a heavy user of IBM Power HA, for example. And, there's been times over the years where we've had to reach out to IBM and we've had a specific bit of firmware or microcode developed, which has helped us in that preventative maintenance. It's avoided downtime or replication issues. So that feature is absolutely gold.
And look, a lot of the response from the TPM is, how often does this happen? All right, it's got to be pretty rare that you need to be writing your own microcode, and that's true, right? We certainly hope that doesn't happen. That's not a regular occurrence, and in my experience, not. But a lot of customers don't make sure that their firmware management is up to date, right? So sometimes we show up, engineer shows up, and they're running a machine. It's a fairly old machine, but they haven't updated the firmware for years and years and years. And so if you're in that situation and you don't have a valid IBM maintenance contract, if a problem occurs, you won't even be able to load the latest version because you won't have access to it. Now, IBM's recommendation is you're always on N or N-1, a level of firmware, which means you're on the latest or the second latest. So it's really important to make sure you have that in place. But my point is, yes, these things might be rare, right? But if it does happen, this is really critical. That means it's a really critical issue. You've got an outage, and the TPM simply cannot resolve that, right? And if you're trying to escalate that to IBM, there's little we can do if you're not under an IBM maintenance contract, right? And for some of these customers, we're talking about, if it's an outage, this could be, front of newspaper kind of news, right?
Yeah.
It's pretty serious stuff.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, I always give the example if I'm talking to executives about maintenance decisions. And if you're a $365 million business and you're out for one day, that's effectively $1 million you're putting at risk. And as you mentioned, Wallace, you've got the reputational damage as well if that gets out into the media. So yeah, it's an interesting decision when it comes down to that.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Jeff. And it's that I guess customers need to be informed when they're making these decisions, right? It is a risk versus reward. You're talking about, the TPM might be cheaper, but that's because a lot of people aren't taking into consideration the risk and the value of the risk.
Yeah. Look, the key point really is if the third-party support vendor can't fix it and they have to escalate to IBM with no contract in place, the customer really has no control over the resolution timeframe, and that's really scary stuff, right? So I think some great points covered there. Look, key risk 5. Let's move on. I'm just conscious of time.
No, we could talk for hours on this topic.
Exactly. Key risk 5 is the strictly confidential CE login, the restricted customer engineer login, only used by IBM to perform very specific service procedures. Sometimes issues, as we know, can only be resolved via a firmware update. It's as simple as that. And some can only be applied with the CE login, which in the case of a power server allows access to the service processor. Having third-party maintenance, and they shouldn't be using this login. It's IBM confidential.
Yeah, that's right, Daniel. And look, you've summed it up pretty neatly. The CE login, as we call it, is an IBM confidential password. For the right reasons, right? You don't want anyone just going in and tinkering with what that login can actually do. But there are instances where we're talking about critical failures, critical issues, where in order to resolve it, you do need an engineer logging in and sort of performing functions to bring up and rectify some of those issues. Resetting some of those things that are happening on the system, and that only the engineer has access to that. And typically that happens when you've got a fault. An IBM engineer actually comes on site. They're working on the problem, and they need to actually log in. So they'll give our remote support team a call, and that password's handed down. And only that account, that CE login account, can work on specific activities on that server. So again, the TPM does not have access to this. It's not a password you can just Google and try to find. Trust me, I've had a look. It doesn't exist.
It's not all ones and twos anymore, no?
I'm pretty sure they changed that a little while ago, Jeff.
In the AS400 days, Jeff.
Were they the passwords you used to use when you were an engineer, Jeff?
I think so. Nice and easy to remember.
Indeed, and yeah, indeed. And so look, again, we're talking about critical failures here. At TPM, if a TPM encounters something like this, they won't be able to resolve those sorts of issues.
Again, it comes back to the previous point. If they can't fix it and they need this ID, they'll need to escalate to IBM. And again, no SLAs, longer resolution time. It's just a huge risk to the business. So. Excellent. Look, our 6th and final risk point that we've highlighted, and it's one that's becoming more and more prevalent, is the security vulnerabilities. IBM obviously released patches to fix these more and more. However, these are not available to customers that have opted to take third-party maintenance, which for me is just a huge risk to any business.
Yeah, that's right. And like you say, it's such an important topic these days. Security is number one focus for many organizations. It's on the news. There are legislation that comes out to govern some of the industries that our customers are in, right? And so You're right, and look, let me be clear, right? There are some instances. There are some instances where there are security vulnerabilities that are found, they're addressed, and sometimes IBM does make that publicly available to everyone. And in a lot of instances, that is locked to customers of IBM. So again, you do need a valid IBM maintenance contract to be able to access those things when they're rolled out from IBM Fix Central, whether it's PTFs or updates in microcode, firmware, patching, software patching, etc.
Yep, exactly. So just before we move on to, I think we've got a couple of questions, but before that, just final thoughts for everybody. We've covered 6 key risks with the intent on raising awareness. And for me, my key takeaways are, make sure you make an informed decision. IBM maintenance isn't just about being able to place support calls for faults. It's about having access to all sorts of tools, Fix Central for up-to-date patches. And, without consistent patching or none at all, what impact is that going to have on your software and hardware, and what impact is that going to have on your application? Typically critical applications that are running on this type of hardware. And finally, for me, the fastest and most efficient way to diagnose those faults is having an active ESA. And that really, for me, is key to keeping the risks low.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, Wallace, you mentioned IBM's recommendation is to be at N or N-1, and we've always followed that approach with our customers as well. Since we 6 years ago, Evolution Systems, we became ISO 27001. So we follow that, and our security policies state that we need to be at the latest levels of firmware, or N-1 as well. So yeah, it's a very important topic, and as we get more and more legislation, we're going to find more and more companies enforce that sort of security policy. So that's a really important topic. And one thing we haven't mentioned is without IBM software maintenance, with IBM iWorld anyway, you lose the ability to transfer your licenses. So if you're doing a future upgrade to a later power box, you're going to be incurring significant costs at that point.
Yeah, spot on, Jeff. And look, I just want to, just put a challenge out there, right? If you're currently with a TPM, or even if you're, self-managing some of the machines, if you're not on an IBM maintenance contract, look, have a chat to Daniel and Jeff. Reach out to them, right? And the purpose of this call was really to help, inform people about what the scope of the IBM maintenance agreement actually comes with, what it entails, and I hope we've sort of communicated that. Now, have a chat with Daniel and Jeff. Reach out to them, and look, if you're currently with a TPM, we'll see what we can do. Right? If we can match the pricing, then you've basically eliminated all that risk. And if not, then at least you're making an informed decision about about going with the TPM, because often if you're talking about, if the TPM's 5% cheaper, to me that's a no-brainer. You're saving 5%, but that's a huge amount of risk you're taking on. So it's important to be making that informed decision.
Exactly. You mentioned earlier on, Wallace, about that, the need to get a specific bit of microcode written for you may be very low. But there's a lot of other benefits that we've covered off today, and I'm hoping that we've really got that message across. And you're right, that small saving that you might make at maintenance renewal time could really come back to bite you further down the track. So I'm glad you raised that, because if there are people out there that are currently on third-party maintenance, it is a very simple process to switch over, now that you've probably understood some of the additional benefits that comes with IBM maintenance.
Absolutely. Very good. Okay, I believe we've got a couple of questions. Can we send the first one through? From Grant: am I able to log a case with IBM Engineer to come out if I don't have active maintenance? Can they do it on TNM support? Yeah,
look, we do have a process for what's called TNM support, or time and material. So the way that works is, look, you can still log a call through the 131 IBM number, and typically the remote team who picks up that call, they'll go through an entitlement check, right? So they'll check if the machines are under a valid support agreement with IBM. And if it's not, you can still log that call, and we can still have an engineer dispatched and help you through that problem. Just a couple of caveats with that. Number one, like I said, it is time and material, so you are paying for the parts and the time for the engineer. And we don't know how long that's going to take to resolve your issue. So if it's if it's 2 hours, great. If it's 20 hours, obviously that can become a very costly exercise. There is a minimum charge out rate, and that's 2 hours for our engineers, plus any parts, obviously. So we can't typically give you a quote of the upfront cost when you're logging that call. The second thing is we don't have a service level on T&M. So if you're experiencing an outage, look, we'll try to help you out, right? But if you need someone on site within the 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, we cannot guarantee that. Obviously we provide priority to our maintenance customers. So that's something to be mindful of. If it's a critical, urgent issue, you need someone out there. There's no guarantee that you'll get that in a TPM call.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, our managed services works very similar. We have managed services and T&M clients, but obviously your managed service customers are, get the SLAs.
Correct.
That's what they pay for. So thanks for that, Wallace. I believe we've got one more question. We do. Excellent.
But actually, that's a great point. That's another hidden benefit, isn't it, around the SLA on your maintenance calls, right? We didn't really cover that off, but that's another hidden benefit too.
Yeah, absolutely. The service levels in your maintenance contract, they're defined in the contract, obviously. So if you have a maintenance contract, have a look through that and make sure you understand what that service level is.
Yeah. Because there's different levels, right? You can have 24 hours, same day, next business day, and all sorts of different levels. So,
absolutely. Yep.
Yeah. Very good. One more question. I think we've got time. Okay, Cassie, thank you. A third-party vendor told me they can provide firmware updates on their own maintenance contracts. Is this legitimate?
Look, so as we mentioned before, the firmware updates, things like firmware patching, the PTF, etc., they are protected in Fix Central, in IBM Fix Central website, and they are available when those machines are under a valid IBM maintenance contract. Okay, so simply put, so if you're with a TPM and they're saying that they can provide you firmware updates, now unless they're backing that support back with IBM, unless they're backing that support out with IBM, they are not providing that to you under the legal IBM licenses that you have. So if a TPM is not backing it with IBM, the answer is basically no. They're not providing the firmware legally under the appropriate IBM licensing. And that's something you really need to be pressing the TPM about, right? So if they're saying that, look, we can provide you firmware updates, whilst that might be, whilst they may have access to that, you need to be pushing them to make sure that they're doing that in a law-abiding way.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Guys, we've covered a lot today, and we could literally go on. Thank you for your time, Jeff and Wallace. I really appreciate it. Wallace, some great insights into the advantages of IBM maintenance. And thank you for everyone for joining us. And for those that registered, you will receive an ebook summarizing everything that we've spoken about today. And for those that didn't register properly or just watching live, thank you very much. You can download the ebook from our website. And look, if this has raised any concerns for anybody out there with their current maintenance or where they're at, just please feel free to reach out, and we can have a look at what you've got and what your contract is, and help you out. So
awesome.
Nothing further to say. Thank you very much, and I'll see you again.
Wallace.
Thanks, Daniel. Thanks, Jeff, for having me on.
Everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Yes.